All right. It's 9:45. We'll get going and hopefully we will pick up a few stragglers. Although I will acknowledge it is hard to compete with a phone-free school panel, which I kind of wish you were all in there, to be totally honest. So, okay. Well, good morning. I am Starlee Coleman. I'm the president and CEO of the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, and we are glad to have you in this room today when you have lots of options to pick really cool conversations. We're going to spend the next hour on a few critical policy issues that are facing public charter schools around the country today. And we have a great panel here for the conversation. So we've got Dr. Cara Candal, the Vice President of Policy at ExcelinEd, Dr. Pam McCue on the end here, the CEO of Nurses Middle College, which we're going to get into. It's really cool. And we've got Scott Bess in the middle. He's the president and CEO of the Indiana Charter Innovation Center. So we hope that you walk away today with a few policy ideas to take back to your state that will help charter schools continue to thrive. I want to start today by kicking off this discussion by taking just a quick step back. There are more students than ever attending charter schools today. There are nearly 4 million students in charter schools, and our student enrollment has grown by 500,000 students over the last 6 years. And that's while we're seeing district enrollment across the country drop pretty significantly. That includes growth in blue states and in red states, and in red states with robust private school choice programs. So I like to say that charter schools are the school choice of choice. For decades, charter schools have evolved and innovated in remarkable ways, including early college and career academies, a growing trend of micro schools, and serving specific student populations. But school models aren't the only way to innovate. It could be the way a school sets its schedule or uses its building, the way it provides professional development to its teachers, or its use of data driven tutoring support for students. And let's be real, sometimes innovation is just teaching kids to read and write at grade level. So, the flexibility built into state charter laws is what allows charters to adapt to what students in their own communities need. So, we're going to talk today about the policy framework that allows and supports charter innovation and some important things that we want you to keep in mind as you head back home. We're going to go to Dr. McCue first. Dr. McCue, tell us about the Nurses Middle College model. What sets it apart from a traditional high school, and what conditions make school models like this possible? And then on the practical side, how does funding work? Does it rely heavily on philanthropy, or can you actually figure it out on state funding?
Well, thank you very much. So, what is a nurse's middle college model? We are an innovative charter high school, and I want to underline charter school because everything that you mentioned, we take full advantage of in being creative and flexible. We serve grades 9 through 12. At full scale, it's 500 students. Our flagship is in Providence, Rhode Island, and we just launched the Nurses Middle College Nashville in Nashville, Tennessee. So why did we come up with the nursing middle college model? Well, we and I'm a registered nurse by profession, and in fact, I didn't even know what a charter school was when I started on this work. But there it was and continues to be a healthcare workforce crisis. And I know we just had a session on crisis, and we have always looked at it that way. And the exacerbation of COVID, we've had a mass exodus of nurses and advanced healthcare providers. We were already an aging workforce, and that just exacerbated it. So we needed to do something different. Also, too, our traditional pathway programs, even from students who had the highest and cum in their schools, were still coming to college unprepared for the rigors of a nursing or healthcare college program. And my colleagues and nursing professors would spend lots of time the first year in remediation, rather than on getting right to the core courses. Also, too, you've had a lot of students saying, "Yeah, I want to be in healthcare. I want to be a nurse," because they saw something really great on TV or in a movie. They had no idea what they were really getting themselves into. So, therefore, that became quite a barrier. We had lots of attrition, and we did not have students pursuing to degree completion and enter into the workforce. And then number three, healthcare crisis, that's what we refer to it, is we needed to create new early pathways to get students interested. And students who may never thought about college, never thought about healthcare. And so we needed to create our own new pathway. So, thus, the birth of the Nurses Middle College. And so, what makes it different? We are a college prep curriculum. Every student's, we're charter school, so it is lottery, but every single student is enrolled in the same program. We are mission focused. That's what we do. It's a school of choice. You want healthcare and nursing, we're your school, but we are aligned to our mission. It's a college prep curriculum, and we integrate nursing and healthcare knowledge in every single core content subject. Kids in ninth grade can see why math is important to be a nurse or a physician or a healthcare provider. They learn about the history of health and social studies. We have connected everything, and it keeps the students engaged, and they're thinking, "Oh, I'm already 14, 15, and I'm preparing for my career." Another thing is that we have work-based learning experiences in healthcare at every single grade level, and they range from shadowing to internships to paid apprenticeship, culminating in an entry-level patient care workforce certificate in 11th grade and employment. In addition to, and this is fully integrated curriculum, we have dual and concurrent college enrollment. For students who are ready, they begin that journey in 10th grade. Um, but by 11th and 12th grade, our 12th graders are not really on our campus. They are in college. They're earning their prerequisite courses, so they are automatically ready for the rigors of a college nursing program, and sometimes can be directly admitted into that. And then as important is the culture of the school. It is truly a healthcare organization culture. We bring the norms of healthcare into the school as our community values. That's compassion, empathy, professionalism, which is being on time, critical thinking, interpersonal communication. So that's what is the program about. But what also makes us different is we're an industry run school. And we have, and the model is not a standalone, it is essential to have partners. We have to have a healthcare partnership and a college partner. And before we even submit a charter application, we have MOUs signed because there's a contract of what they're going to do for our students, what we're going to do for them. And at the end of that contract, we expect employment. So the nursing middle college model, our kids are college and career ready. It's not that we provide these opportunities or exposure. The kids are expected. It's a graduation requirement to earn at least 3 college credits, at least 1 entry-level workforce experience. They must be employed. And that's how we confer a high school diploma. So that's a lot. Funding? Yes. In any school, organization, business, eventually it needs to be sustainable on the per pupil funding. So we do keep a close eye on that. However, to launch a nursing middle college, we do rely on philanthropy, and we've been very fortunate. And we do lean in to that partnership. We're a return on investment for healthcare partners. And also, too, for our college partners and our nursing programs and healthcare providers, they have accreditation. So when they see attrition and the not degree completion, that's a concern for them. So we do rely heavily. We call it, yeah, -1, 0 when we're finding a facility where we've got um, curriculum, we're designing curriculum, we're working with our partners, we have facilities, and I know we'll get into that. I say that twice, maybe 3 times. But eventually, you have to be sustainable on the per pupil.
Thank you. Scott, Indiana has a pretty robust school choice environment compared to a lot of states. Paint the picture for us. What kind of innovative things are Indiana charters doing? I'm super interested in the micro school initiative in particular. How, in a really competitive landscape, how are charters differentiating themselves for parents? And do you think universal school choice is going to make it easier to innovate, or is it, or is that irrelevant to the ability for a charter to innovate?
Great question again. Hi, everybody. Yeah, this is the Indiana time slot. I think we've got 3 different panels going on right now with Indiana people in it. So thank you, by the way. I'm sure Katie Jenner's is full as she does her thing. Um, Indiana is a full choice state in almost every aspect, right? So we have obviously we have charter school law that's now 20 almost 25 years old. We have now universal vouchers, and so anybody of any income level can get a voucher from say go to a private school. We have a small ESA program that is for special ed students and their siblings. Likelihood is in 2027 that will go to a universal ESA. And then we also have full district to district transfer. There is almost no boundary requirements. There's a few districts that don't do it, but almost everybody else does, right? So you have this universe in the state of Indiana that is any child can go anywhere they want to go, right? What that has meant for charters is, to your last question, is innovation is not necessarily like a bonus, it's now a necessity. Like if you are going to survive and thrive, you have to show how you're different, how you're better. So right, so an example of like what Pam schools, that's something a model that we would love to have in Indiana. Hint, hint, hint. That says, hey, look, here's something that no one else is doing. We launched this year, we helped incubate my organization, a charter micro school that's in a rural district. Um, One of the other panelists in the other room is the guy that's running that. He's a rural school superintendent, traditional district superintendent, and he's the executive director of the Indiana Micro School Collaborative, which is the start of what will be a network of micro school sites around the state. And so I think that's a place. Almost all of our charter schools now are in urban areas, where the value proposition is roughly, hey, the district schools are terrible. We're better. We're not that, right? We're at least slightly better. In some cases, significantly better. And I think that's great, but you're really zeroed in on a small number of sites in the state. We have 3 or 4 cities that can sustain that. We have almost no presence in the rural areas, almost no presence in the suburban areas, because that value proposition doesn't work there. Some of you guys have heard me say this before. Like, in the suburbs, people move there because they perceive that the schools are great. Now, they may or may not be, but that's perception of it. In the rural areas, grandma and grandpa went to that school, so you cannot tell me that it's not great. And the population isn't such that you can support a 300 or 400 student school because there's not that many students. And so the micro school initiative is something that we see is going to scale quickly. It started with one site at a campground in a very rural area. You ought to come see it. The first 2 weeks, someone described it as a bunch of feral children running around without shoes. Um, but it really has attracted a lot of kids that were homeschooled who now come in because it kind of mimics that environment. It's multi-age, right? I was out there 2 weeks ago. A ton of cross population with students. It's competency based, so students are progressing at their pace. I was in a middle grade English language arts group, but in there was a second grader because she's an exceptional reader and was ready to take on that kind of challenge. So, and it also brings them back into the public setting. So from an accountability perspective, right, they just finished their first round of testing, which for some of these students was the first time they had ever taken a state test. They'd never been in school. And so it really creates opportunity for growth and to show that in the traditional, whether it's the charter schools, private schools, district schools, that there is a different way to do this. And it's going to scale quickly. Like their charter allows them to get up into the thousands of students around the state. I think their top is 35,000, which that's about, we have 55,000 charter school students in the state now. And so you can see the kind of growth that might engender. But it's also being done sometimes in conjunction with districts because it's a way the district can say, hey, we helped bring this opportunity here. And we have a statute that allows charter schools to connect with district schools. So in a high school setting, for example, a student at the micro school could actually compete and play with like on the district's sports teams, robotics teams, whatever have it. Because that's sometimes the downside to a micro school. Is like it's micro. Not much fun having a prom with 30 kids. Um, and so I think that's a way that we can get a ton of growth, a lot of innovation, and take advantage of this. And the idea is if we don't have this kind of innovation happening, charter schools then are just another option. And I think, and it's in a increasing choice environment, you have to be able to differentiate yourself. And I think this is a way to get models like Pam's. There's some others in there, like the micro school thing. We have a huge push on apprenticeships in Indiana. The challenge for district schools on that is if you're going to have a student who's going to be gone, 3 or 4 days a week, how do you schedule that? And as we've talked to the K-12 folks, it's like, yeah, we'd love to do that, but we have a 2,000 student high school. How are we going to schedule those 50 kids who are going to be gone all this time? And their solution is, well, we'll just bring them in and put them in study hall with a computer and they'll get their credits that way, which is a horrible experience for everybody involved. We think we can have these charter micro high schools that are industry focused, again, similar to the concept that Pam talked about, where they're focused on an industry, they have the connections with the partners, they're mining what the students are doing in the workplace for academic credit. And again, that creates an environment where, and it gets really flexible. Not everybody has to be on the same schedule. So again, that's where we think we can really enable something that's a huge state initiative with this innovation piece of it. So really excited about that. There's a lot to go.
Thank you. I'm for feral children running around without shoes on. And Dr. Candal, not every state law actually allows for that kind of opportunity and innovation for charter schools to fill a unique niche role like that. So here are my questions for you. What are the biggest policy barriers that stifle innovative options from developing? And then how should lawmakers be thinking about crafting an accountability system that holds schools accountable and allows for innovation at the same time? Ooh, you have 2 minutes. I'm just kidding.
Well, no, I mean, she throws the question about charter regulation from the lady from Massachusetts who went to college in Indiana, and now that she has 3 kids is like, what was I thinking? Because we have no choice in Massachusetts. We have great public schools, but you live where you live, and you get what you get, and you don't get upset. We do have a charter sector, but our charter sector is in so many ways. I'll just use Massachusetts as an example of how some states, right? Starlee mentioned that we've had great growth in charter schools, but if you look at a map, that growth is in some places and then there's a decline in others. And so for those, I'm sure many of you in the room have heard that charter schools over time have suffered from like death by 1,000 cuts. So there are a couple ways to do it, right? You start off with a really bad charter law that just essentially says you should look just like public schools. Or you start out with an okay charter law and over time you add on and you add on and you add on. So I'll give you a few examples. So for example, in Massachusetts, we have not 1 but 2 charter school caps because why stop at 1? So much better if you really want to fend off those schools. And then there are just things that states can do. For example, not allowing for multiple authorizers, right? So we should always think about variety in authorizers, as well as when you've got really good charter schools going or you want to attract good charter schools to your state, looking at that one part of the bargain, which is charters are supposed to have more autonomy in exchange for accountability. And we will get to the accountability piece. You have to give them real autonomy. And for high performers, you also want to look at what does that authorization process look like. So if I've got a charter school with a proven track record of great student outcomes over 20 years, and maybe I want to attract them to my state. The state of Florida just did this, which is really impressive, right? Eva Moskowitz in Success Academy going to Florida, but she went in and sort of said, hey, listen, I need these conditions to operate. What you have in place is too onerous. Let's talk about it, right? lift those conditions. And some of those conditions go to things like facilities. Let's talk about facilities for a minute because I think that that's really the big one. You can kill charter schools death by a thousand cuts by making them look like public schools in terms of not giving them flexibility in terms of the school day or not actually allowing them to have a real mission. Like charter schools are supposed to be about differentiation, not allowing them to be different because you dictate too much of the curriculum. You dictate what the school day is supposed to look like. Oh, you dictate, by the way, the teaching force. You don't let charters select their own teachers. That's a big one. But facilities, I think probably any charter operator person in this room knows that in many, many places is just the darned worst part. Because in most places, charters don't have access to local funding, which means you have to figure out a way to pay for your per pupil, to operate on your per pupil, to give students the resources you want, to pay your teachers, and at the same time keep the lights on. Public schools don't have to worry about that. So some states are getting innovative, and I think we can talk a little bit more about that, Scott, right? But like I'll throw out one example of a place like Idaho, which has said we're going to start giving charters like short-term loans in their early years, see how they perform, and then that can go on to a long-term loan. There are lots of things that states could do. I mean, the biggest ones would be let's give charters access to local funds, which would be a dream, right? And also, let's just give them facilities. Do you have some old unused buildings lying around? There's this thing, public school enrollment's declining. And I know in my state, right, we protect those. Nope, we would rather that building sit empty than give it to a charter school because God forbid kids have a choice. So those are just some of the things. Now, in terms of accountability, um, listen, I think this is the next big question because I am all for charters were established on the basis of a bargain, right? Autonomy in exchange for accountability, but actually in exchange for more accountability. Because not only do we require charters as public schools to participate in state tests, to participate in state accountability systems, but beyond that, we say you answer to an authorizer and we can close you whoever the authorizer is. We don't close public schools like that. I was the board chair of a small charter network in the Boston area, and I had to surrender the charter on a school that wasn't performing. And that wouldn't have happened. And it was a very difficult thing. I think it was the right thing to do. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been held to a higher standard of accountability, right? And the board, there were many reasons if you call me later and we can talk about the trauma of it. But I think it's a really important thing. I think, Starlee, in many cases, what we would argue, and I, as a representative of ExcelinEd, would say, is that when it comes to things like assessment and accountability, the accountability piece is critical. But can we allow charters, especially if they are charters, as all charters should be, 100% schools of choice, to have more flexible options when it comes to the kinds of assessments they take, when it comes to there might be some push and pull in the accountability system. But what you can imagine is in a really robust school choice environment like Indiana, right? In Indiana, well, actually, no, you're a terrible example. Indiana vouchers, students have to take the state test in Indiana, but that was existing for a very long time. In most places that now have ESAs, for example, private school students, not necessarily the private schools themselves, but private school students will participate in norm reference testing, right? So that we have some way of knowing whether or not kids are reading, writing, doing the basics. Now, we feel that that's okay because those schools are 100% parent choice. Parents are usually, I know a lot of people don't like parents are the first line of accountability, but the fact of the matter is when a school's not working, parents will leave. And if you've ever run a charter school that was failing, you know that, right? If you've ever run a private school that was failing, you know that. You have to live and die by enrollment. So in 100% choice schools like charters, we might be able to envision a different approach. So what, for example, would Dr. McCue's college need as the kind of assessment that they want that would be tailored to what her students need, right? And then could you give a norm referenced assessment to make sure, yep, they are checking these boxes and teaching the basics. Kids are going to be college ready. And at the same time, the authorizer has a different way of holding them accountable because they have different measures of success. And the way we think about that at ExcelinEd is that you don't regulate a market in the same way. I took this from Darrell Bradford, not going to lie, in the same way that you regulate a monopoly. And if public schools are a monopoly,
then I think there's a really good argument for for treating charters as schools, very important schools of choice on a spectrum differently.
That's a um it is a good point for lawmakers to be thinking about. Part of the bargain, as you said, for charters is that they are supposed to be able to differentiate their model. And one of the things that we have seen is in places where there isn't any flexibility in the testing. And I think, most of us in this room are probably here because we believe that schools should be held accountable for results. One of the challenges in creating like a one size fits all structure in testing is that schools with unique or different models, like a nurse's middle college or even like a Montessori school, that structures their curriculum in a certain way that maybe doesn't always align with the timeline of state standards. If kids are, forced to take, for example, Texas history tests in the second or third grade, but a Montessori school maybe doesn't get to state history until a kid is in fifth or sixth grade. Well, those kids are not going to do very well on that portion of the test, and it might give you the wrong impression as policymakers about the success of a particular school model. So you do need to think about that flexibility in terms of accountability and assessment. Okay, so everyone so far has talked about facilities. So let's get into facilities. As Dr. Candal said, it is certainly the biggest barrier to charter growth in every state in the country is charter access to charter facilities. We charters do not have the same access to funding streams. They don't have the same access to buildings as district schools, and in fact, nationwide, on average, charter schools receive about 85 cents for every dollar that school districts receive. And the gap is driven largely by lack of access to local property tax funding and other funding that school districts receive for buildings. So that means that the money that you send to a charter school that is supposed to be used for classroom expenses, teacher salary, is paying for their buildings. We're also increasingly seeing across the country local governments using their ability to weaponize zoning and building permitting processes to block charter schools from coming into their communities. In Texas, we had to pass a state law to require local governments to treat charter schools at the same as school districts in zoning and permitting issues because there would be huge demand for a charter school to come into a community, but they couldn't get a building permit. So Scott, Indiana is one state that has taken really significant steps to address the charter facilities problem. So, walk us through what just happened and how the Facilities Authority came to be and what you think that's going to look like, how lawmakers should be thinking about if somebody was bold enough to replicate what you guys just did, what should they be thinking about?
Now this is, I mean, before I did this, I was a kind of a serial school starter, and I would say facilities and transportation were the bane of my existence. I used to have a full head of flowing hair, and that went away in a hurry. Um, I want to acknowledge first, it takes a ton of courage and cooperation from the state legislature, right? I mean, that's first and foremost, that's where everything is starting. So, sitting in the audience out there is Representative Bob Benning, chair of our House Ed Committee, who has done yeoman's work on, first of all, like a lot of deregulation work around for schools in general, but has been really helpful to charter schools. He's in the second year of a 3-year process on that. He also was, I mentioned the apprenticeship stuff early. He was one of the early proponents of that, which again is going to create opportunity for charter school growth around the state. And I think this last year, you mentioned local funding. Like again, we've had this massive gap in funding. So charter schools in Indiana are funded in the same way that all the district schools are, except district schools have access to local property taxes. And in some places, the gap is massive. In Indianapolis, it's over $8,000 a student, right? So imagine what that.
Did you all hear that? $8,000
Yeah.
a student gap.
And so when you have something like that, you to survive. And by the way, the gap kept growing because as assessed valuation went up, the gap kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And so we were able to get some stuff done a couple of years ago that would keep the gap from growing. this last year we were able to get something passed through that gives charter schools access to local property taxes beginning in 2028. And it phases in 25% the first year, 50%, 75%, and finally in 2031, full sharing. Now, there are some challenges with that. Like, first of all, that's 2028. There are 2 more legislative sessions between now and then. And so, defense, right? And so making sure that we really protect what's happened there and also look at, there were some carve outs like, hey, this district doesn't have to do it because they don't have this many charter school kids going to a charter school, so they're exempt. Well, that's a problem for the charter schools who happen to have a bunch of kids from that district, right? And so we're working on those things to try to improve that. And again, in an environment where property tax reform in Indiana was issue number 1, that was Senate Bill 1 last year, and so that's a huge importance. People now are coming to grips with, oh, wait a minute, like this municipality and this school district are going to have, in a lot of cases, they say, well, we're going to lose $30 million. Well, they're actually going to get $10 million more. They thought they were going to get $40 million, right? And so this idea of like, oh, we're losing money, like, well, you actually have the same amount of money you had last year. So it's working in an environment like that is really challenging, and that's really kind of our primary advocacy work. And I think the other thing now has happened, as you referenced, like the building authority piece. Legislature last year also created a commission. Well, there were 2 things that happened that are parallel and very, very similar. They created a pilot program where charter schools could enter into an agreement with districts and or organizations around facilities and transportation. And so we have 3 pilots going on now. One is in Indianapolis, and so all 50 charter schools have said, hey, we're going to join together in this pilot to look at how might we manage facilities and transportation together. And there's a 3-year pilot program. At the end of that, it is possible that whatever entity gets created there could also take on taxing authority, right? And so you would then have an independent entity to do that. And we have in Indianapolis, we have it in South Bend, and then in the rural district, it is the micro school and the school district it's located in, and then there's a couple private organizations there as well.
Okay, so can I ask you a question and then I'm going to move to Pam? So, would you say for policymakers in the room that a recommendation would be if you're going to like poke the bear, right, of making districts share property tax money with charter schools, you should just like rip off the Band-Aid, not put it 3 years down the road or whatever?
Yeah, I think that's, again, that was obviously in the process, there's a lot of compromise because originally it was nope, immediately, and sharing not just operational local monies, but also capital local monies. And through the process, capital fell off. And then it's like, oh, we'll do it in 2028. Because, and again, in the context of we're also having this massive property tax bill anyway. And we're like, we want to see what the effects of that are before we actually implement it. But I think this idea of building and transportation entities is a really good one, in that like school districts aren't magically geniuses at managing real estate and transportation, turns out. And so having an entity that's separate that can then look at this across the sector. And so, charter schools could
More like a real estate
trust, basically.
trust.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where things are headed. Stay tuned. This legislative session will be a ton of fun. Interested observer.
Okay, Dr. McCue. Schools like the Nurses Middle College, I mean, obviously you can't you need a different kind of building, right? For a program like the kind of program that you are running. So what should lawmakers be thinking about? Like, how does that work for you? And how does it like how do schools like yours, like how do you find space? How do you pay for space when it's so different? And what do lawmakers need to be thinking about, like to set you up, schools like yours up for success?
Yes. Well, I don't offer any solutions, but I have all the battle scars of this. We got into this business to create nurses and healthcare providers, and obviously we need a building and other things to consider. We have our authentic partnerships. Our kids are in the clinical setting. On Wednesdays, they may do an hour or two of academics, and then they are at their internship where they're getting stipend or employed. So we need to be located near our healthcare providers. So that's transportation issue. We also need to be located near colleges because our kids in 12th grade spend more time on a college campus. That's what our model is, than with us. So it's location to those partners, but also is it accessible to our families? And then we have specialized equipment. We have a nursing lab. Now it doesn't have to be the sophisticated simulation lab that we lean into our partners who have the sophisticated simulation labs. That so we use their space, but we do have specialized equipment in hospital beds and labs. So it is really, really difficult. Um, and and then there is no. We have to take money. Again, we don't get a dime until the student sits in the seat. The student sits in the seat. So how are we supposed to create this wonderful big school and all these partnerships with no money because we're not going to get paid until the student sits in there? So we that's why we lean into philanthropy. We lean into our partners, and that's part of the deep partnership. Ideally, we'd love a building. In fact, I've become so bold now. Hi, we want a nurses middle college. Do you have a building? Do you have a building on the college campus, or do you have a building in healthcare? So that's where we really lean in. And then if we are close to our partners, then we don't necessarily have to have the state of the art biology lab. We'll go use the college. But it is very difficult. And again, to set up a school, and even if you're finding a building, there are soft costs. You have to do a test fit. You have to have architectural drawings. That all costs money even before you even get to the lease or tenant improvement. So, um, you know, there needs to be it would be very helpful if there was a bucket of money when a charter is approved. Yes, there's CSP, the Charter School Planning Grants. They have restrictions on them, and they don't cover everything. We're pleasantly surprised Tennessee did have a facilities, and they gave us $500,000 to open. That was wonderful. In Rhode Island, when we first started out, we were rubbing two nickels, asking everybody for money and the incentive. We were eventually able to buy a building. It's a 50,000 square foot building right in downtown Providence, right in the college and healthcare district. And the incentive is there is a little bit reimbursement on a mortgage from Rhode Island if we're an innovative career themed program. But facilities is definitely an issue that definitely needs to be considered. You can't set up a great program if you don't have a source of money to get it started.
Dr. McCue, can I ask you a question? So, if you had easier access to both facilities and transportation, what would happen with that money? How many more teachers or resources or students could you put out into the workforce and get through your program?
Oh, we could. We have it in Rhode Island. We have 400 students on a waiting list. We only enroll in the ninth grade. So that's about 150 students. We could expand. In fact, a building in Providence, it's a 50,000, 60, I think it's 60,000 square foot building. We could. And also, too, it's not, and I know we're going to get into choice. We are mission focused. That's who we are. That's all we're going to be. And there's enough innovation in healthcare that we have to turn on a dime anyway. However, we can't create all the nurses and healthcare providers, so we could do after school program, we could do summer program, we could bring in all public school district, homeschool kids. We could do so much in specialized programming for the whole community if we didn't have to spend our operational money on facilities.
Okay. Dr. McCue mentioned the charter schools program. So at the National Alliance, we're the national advocacy organization that's working at the federal level to try to make changes for at the to the way the money flows for the federal charter schools program. How many of you know if your state has a state CSP grant? Okay. Okay, good. A good chunk of you. Okay. So it's, as you may know, it's a really complex program, and as Dr. McCue mentioned, it's, like, super complex for schools to comply with the rules, and it's really complex for the state, department or whatever state entity that has the grant to comply with as well. They're just really, really complicated programs. So we're working to make it a lot easier for states and schools to actually use the money, including to put more money into the facilities piece of the CSP, but including, like, here's a really important thing that we're trying to do at the federal level is make the facilities subgrant program accessible to states that create a revolving loan fund. So, with a tiny little bit of state money, like let's say you put $10 million in state money into a revolving loan fund, the federal government could come in and match that money, which would create a $20 million revolving loan fund, which would be a pretty significant investment in charter school facilities in your state. So, be thinking about that as you head into next session. Like, is this an opportunity for you to, while we're pushing at the federal level, to have money on the table to match that investment that you make at the state level? Like, can you make that a priority in your state to put a little tiny bit of money, state money, into a pot that would allow really great schools in your community to grow? Happy to talk about that afterwards. If anybody needs an example of a really good revolving loan fund, we're happy to give you some language from another state that's already done this to make it helpful. Okay, Dr. McCue said we're going to get into choice. Here's our last question. We're going to go fast, and then we're going to open it up to questions from you. Obviously, there are. I will tell you this. I have been in this job at the National Alliance for about 15 months. I have answered more questions in this job about ESAs than charter schools. So that is an interesting it's, like, interesting, right? Like, okay, that tells you what the zeitgeist is out there about school choice. I have heard some lawmakers are bold enough to tell me to my face, charter schools are an old idea. What? No. Let me tell you, like, we are on the cutting edge of innovation, including in ESA programs. So here's what I want to talk about. In ESA programs and other programs where states are allowing per pupil funding to be used in an a la carte way, charter schools can be a huge solution to the supply side problem that gets created in a circumstance like that. There are not enough seats in most states at private schools. When you say any kid in this state can take money to go to a private school, not enough schools, not enough seats that will be able to accommodate all of those kids. So, how, Dr. Candal, let's talk about how lawmakers need to be thinking about creating a structure in their ESA programs that will allow charters to be part of the supply solution and allow for innovation and more options for families that are shopping for a la carte services. And Texas friends are doing some really cool stuff. We can talk about that if we have a minute.
Yeah, we can talk briefly about Texas. I think it's yeah. I listen, here's the deal. For those of anybody who's sitting in the room that thinks that like an ESA is not coming for your state, unless maybe you live in the Northeast like us, it's coming. And that's we should embrace that. I think it's proven to be a great thing for families. And Starlee's right. There's a supply side problem. It's actually let's not call it a problem. There's a ramp up. It's going to take time, but charters are there. They're waiting. They can step in if if we remember to include them in ESA laws right from the beginning, which is a challenge. And I think it's something Texas did a good job of making sure that was in there. But that's not the whole story. There are, and I'll encourage everybody, if you haven't, to please go to schoolchoicematters.org. Did I get that right, Abby? Okay. Whew. Schoolchoicematters.org is a website that ExcelinEd we've put together. Our choice team has put together. They're very expert in this. And it can show you like down to like any choice policy you can think of. Does your state have it? And also, like, is it any good? Because your state might have it and it might not be very good or might be difficult to implement or there might be barriers to implementation. But there are policies in there, for example, like part time enrollment. How many people here know if their state has a part time enrollment law? Exactly. Many of you do. You don't know it. It's just like many of us don't know. My state has open enrollment, meaning open transfer between districts, but only sort of, because in some cases a district has to say, yes, I accept that student. Hint, hot tip, they're not going to accept the students that have special needs or otherwise are quote unquote difficult to teach. With a good part time enrollment law, for example, now this is where charters can get really innovative. Think about if a charter school could say, I'm going to take homeschool students who have an ESA and I'm going to allow them access to my math and science courses because that's what the homeschool students are asking for, and then they take part of that ESA. It requires only a state being able to say, well, this course is worth this much money, right? These many credit hours are worth this much money. And then you're tapping into a whole world. There are virtual opportunities. There are a lot of virtual charter schools out there and there's demand for this type of schooling and it's only going to increase. So step one is make sure charters and public schools, by the way, districts should be taking advantage of ESAs. Let's not leave them out. And I think that this will push districts in many ways to be more innovative and open. But it needs to be in the law. You need to have what we like to call these sort of ancillary policies, right? Like part time enrollment to allow charters to take full access. And then the other thing I would say is like charters need help figuring this out. So there need to be organizations like Starlee's, organizations like Scott's that can come in and say, this is how you would structure it and what's going to work for your school. And there needs to be flexibility as well in terms of things like how does it count toward your lottery? For example, if you're taking part time homeschool students. So there are a lot of things to think through, but they are all things that are very much worth thinking through. There are a couple of states that are already doing this. I think I would point to New Hampshire as a smaller program, a pretty successful model. I think many of us are looking to Texas because we're talking overnight you're going to have what, like a million kids in an ESA. It's going to be huge. It's going to be just tip the scales to figure out how this is being done. We can maybe, you want to pass it on and talk about the pilots later.
Let me just answer or raise really quick. Right up here in the front, colleagues from Texas. There are a group of charter schools in Texas that have come together under the guidance of the Texas Public Charter Schools Association and another organization there to try to figure out exactly what Dr. Candal was saying. How do you actually operationalize the freedom and flexibility that charter schools have been given to be service providers to ESA families in a place like Texas? So there's a handful of schools that are trying to figure that out, trying to answer the questions, put together guidance essentially for their colleagues around the country so that schools are not trying to start from scratch every time an opportunity like this comes up. But it's not just courses that schools could make available. It's things like there's one school in the pilot program in Texas that is trying to figure out. They do really excellent college guidance counseling, right? So helping students figure out what school to try to match to and how to get ready for that, so they can package that up, and ESA families could take advantage of that kind of program. Enrichment activities, all kinds of other stuff, and their physical space. Like maybe there's a homeschool co-op that needs space for an AP chemistry lab. Schools have chemistry labs, right? So let them make that available at ESA families. So lots of opportunity.
Let me just say one thing, and I think Starlee and her organization deserve a huge shout out here because one of the missing pieces is that the charter community in general is I think in largely due to you coming around to the idea that actually, yeah, we can participate in private school choice programs. And I think like in many parts of the country, charter school operators are like, this kind of choice, not that kind of choice, right? And now that it's here to get into the fold early and to be forward thinking about what the future of education is going to look like. And this is going to be something that helps charters survive and thrive going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. Dr. McCue, Scott, anything you want to add on the school choice piece, and then we'll leave it there and we'll open for questions.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it, especially now that I'm in Tennessee. I don't know if it's going to come to the Northeast
Tennessee's
anytime
law
soon,
needs to
but
change. We have any Tennessee lawmakers in here? You guys wrote charters
I'm looking
out
forward
of
to
the
it.
ESA.
We have as I said before, we are very specific. We are a school choice. We stick to our mission. We're mission driven, but we can't create all the nurses and healthcare providers. So I think there's such opportunity, as I said, as you could say, I was excited because I jumped on the question um, uh, earlier. But I think there's an opportunity to tap into those homeschool kids. We have nursing summer camps beginning in 7th and 8th grade. So we get kids start to introduce them, and also we work on some basic math skills. So there's and workforce development. We do summer programming. We're a school that doesn't close, so we do summer programming that we think other schools, the district kids, we'd love for them to come and get a credential. So I think that we want to be part of this. We can't educate, like I said, if you want what we have, it's fully immersed nursing and healthcare, and that's not for every student. But I think there would be opportunity for us to provide some of our innovative courses and programs to help other students.
Natalie, I think you need to recruit Pam to Texas.
It's Indiana first.
No.
I have the commitment. The only thing I would add, I think, what we've been talking with our membership in Indiana is that enrollment is going to be fluid. Like, you're going to have students in your school and in the same class, some of whom are enrolled with you, some of whom are there on an ESA, some of whom might be somebody from a district where the district is saying, hey, can you serve this student because we don't offer this. Like, all those kids in the same class, and no one will know the difference. And I think that's also a new thing, because some of those kids are going to count towards your accountability, some are going to count, and some are like but preparing people for that eventuality, like, that is going to come, and be ready for it. And talk about how do you disaggregate your services? How much does it cost to be on your robotics team, right? Like, that's a thing. And so being ready for that, so when it does happen, you're not scrambling, because somebody will serve the market. And we want our charter schools to be ready to do that in a leadership role.
I think that is a really, really good place to pause while you all are getting up at the microphone here. If you have questions, I will just say to Scott's last point there, I would just really encourage all of you who are policymakers in this room to be thinking about exactly what Scott said. Like, what is the structure you want to create for the future, right? Making policy in an emergency in response to something is never the way that you're going to create the best policy structure in your state. So be thinking about what you want that future flexibility for families to look like, and what is the structure you can be inching toward now to create a really, really good situation for the future times, which with it could be right around the corner, right? In terms of what's happening at the federal level, as they push more back to the states, you're going to have more and more opportunity. So it's a really, really good, it's a really good point. Okay, tell us who you are and where you live and your question.
I don't think it's on. Is it on? My name is Kristen Franz. I'm with Charter School Specialists. We are the largest authorizer in the state of Ohio. And my question is for Dr. McCue. With your targeted program, you mentioned attrition with nurses once they're in the nursing field. Do you find that you have attrition with students who enter your program and then determine, hey, this is probably not for me? Are there options for them to, because traditional CTE models they would just transfer within the school to a different program. Does that happen frequently, or what are your countermeasures for something like that?
Thank you.
Yeah, so we've discovered that when we do our recruitment, and we have to really let students and families know what our whole model, the rigor, what it's about, that it's comprehensive, and we will have attrition in the 9th grade. What we found is once our students get through the 9th grade, they're hooked. They're hooked. So we're large enough, 500, to have impact, small enough that we get to really know our students. But they're hooked, they're passionate. That's just been our experience.
I want to say one thing about that before Michelle asks her question. I have heard from policymakers that, like, oh, there's students leave, or they're leaving that charter school, and like, as though that could potentially be a red flag for them. There is a charter school for every student, but not every school is for every student, right? Like, some kids don't want to go to a school like this. Some kids don't want to go to a Success Academy where they have an expectation in high school that they have a full schedule of all AP classes. That isn't for every kid. Some kids don't want to go to a school where there isn't a football program. That isn't for every kid, right? So we shouldn't think about attrition at a charter school as an inherent problem. Now, if there's academic problems or other accountability problems, like, okay, let's talk about that. But if it's just kids saying, you know what, this program isn't for me, that's okay, right? That's okay.
Can I just add, we think it's a good thing to find out you do not want a healthcare career in ninth grade,
Yeah.
in 15, then second semester in college.
Or after you've graduated from
After you
college and you have
graduate.
student loan debt
So
that you
we
can't pay back.
always
Right.
preface that.
Yeah.
This mic is making me feel vertically challenged, but I'll go for it. I do have a question, but I just want to succinctly summarize the opportunities because facilities at 22 Beacon are near and dear to our heart. 15% of operating budgets are spent on at charter schools, and sometimes more than that for new and early stage. But those policymakers in the room, access to public buildings, revolving state loan funds, there's only 19 states that have them, credit enhancements, moral obligation, access to district bonds, and of course, property tax funding. Those are the specific levers that you're able to push. Now on to my question, Starlee, for you. How can, if we want to continue to be innovative, what are some steps charters can take now to take advantage of the federal scholarship tax credit now that we know that they can, in fact, take advantage of that?
Yeah, great. So it's similar. So the federal scholarship tax credit was created this summer in the One Big Beautiful Bill. So this is a dollar for dollar federal tax credit against federal income taxes for people who donate to scholarship granting organizations. The law was written in a way to allow public school students to benefit from scholarships. So charter schools can create scholarship granting organizations, raise scholarship money into the account, and then use that money to support ancillary expenses that their students may have, whether that's tutoring or other opportunities that are written into the federal law. It's a great question. And your governors are going to have to opt in to the program. We know this is going to be a legislative fight come next session in lots of states, so be ready for that. If you want your governor to opt in, you'll want to put that on your agenda for them. You'll want to make sure that you know where your governor stands on that. You'll want to be encouraging them to do it, and you'll want to encourage them to make sure that the regulatory structure that is put in place in your state is as free and open and flexible as possible. You should not be thinking about this in a way of like, okay, we're going to opt in, but we're only going to allow scholarship expenses to fund one particular thing or at one particular type of school. We wouldn't want to see that, right? You want to be as flexible as possible.
Yeah, I would just add to that for those of you that might be in states where you don't think your governor will opt in, please tell your governor that, like, think about all of the tax revenue that they will be collecting from folks in your state that will go to other states, right? I think that's like, we've got to hit that really hard.
Thank you, Donovan Head. I'm the executive director of the State Charter Schools Commission in Georgia, and I just wanted to thank you all. This is my sixth time in ExcelinEd, and I don't think I've only seen one other time they've done charter school sessions. And if
We're coming back, baby.
If this was it, this would have been a good reason to come. So just thank you. I sent each of you messages because I have to leave right after this session to follow up. But so much of what you're talking about is relevant to what we're doing in Georgia right now. First of all, I want to add my name to the list. Georgia would love to have nurses MC to come, and I already had ideas for colleges and hospitals we could look at. So we'll definitely want to talk. For Scott, I wanted to reach out on the Indiana legislation. We're looking at that right now, and then also to Starlee on the revolving fund. This is something we're actively looking at, and we've got some legislators here. We have a delegation of 30 folks from Georgia this time, so I'm excited. The conversations at the right time, and we're ready to grow. Georgia, we don't have declining enrollment. I've got 21,000 on wait lists in Georgia. We've got 3.5% in charters when the national rate is 7%. So out of the top 10 most populated states, we're the bottom end on access. So we're all committed to growing, but thank you.
Thank you. If any of you are interested in the revolving loan fund idea, come bring me your card before you take off. And we've got a little document that we put together that walks through a number of promising facilities policies, including everything that Michelle called out as the top 5 things that you should be thinking about that are easy lifts for lawmakers to do not require a whole lot of money. So we'd be happy to talk to you about that.
Hi, I'm Maggie. I work at the Economics Lab, and just stay tuned. We have a report coming on high ROI charters and financial trends to learn from that. But my questions, you mentioned that district enrollment is dropping and districts are facing financial strains. And then Dr. Candal, you talked about how districts are unwilling to kind of give up some of their buildings. So I do think that this is an opportunity for the charter sector in places where they're allowed and they exist and there's not caps and things like that. I'm wondering if there are any lessons that districts can learn when facing school consolidation, because it seems like the charter sector has kind of led with a little bit more courage in that. So are there any lessons to learn about how to go through school consolidation process?
Well, they need to do it, first of all.
Yes.
That's the that's the biggest lesson. I mean, this is a really complicated and tricky policy issue, of course. Emotional issue.
It is, but I think in some states, states make it too easy for districts not to consolidate, right? Like in my home state, you can have declining enrollment, and they call it soft landing funding, and so it's like we also fund what I call ghost students in Massachusetts, right? Like for years and years, and like do that ROI, please, because it's like
Yeah.
okay. But I think that policymakers can really think about you should incentivize, not make it easy for districts to open. You should
Mm.
incentivize them to consolidate. And maybe you do that by putting additional resources into the new consolidated school or funding, right? I think that in charter schools are provide really good, yes, I think lessons from that, because if you look at, they have to be scrappy, right? So they're going to come together and find the facilities and share the science lab like Starlee was saying. And I think maybe somebody in the room, I don't know, maybe we need to highlight case studies, Abby, of how charters could inform declining enrollment. Thanks.
Okay, last question.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm State Senator Pat Billy Miller from Connecticut, and I'm proud of the work that we've done with charter schools in Connecticut. So I want to make it clear I'm not a proponent of charter schools, but I'm a proponent of what works. And so I've had the opportunity to fight for Blue Ribbon School, a school that has become a Blue Ribbon School, and another school that recently this year was a partner between the public, traditional public, and a charter school. And so we're a state that really do support charter schools. We fund our charter schools as well. So my question to you is this. There's been that war between traditional public and charter public schools, and the unions have played a role in that. Did you have pushback from your unions, or do you have pushbacks from your unions in your states?
Oh, Dr. McCue, I would love to hear you answer this one.
We, yes, yes. I mean, our school is not unionized, and I think that it would it prohibit flexibility if we were. So, but there is a lot of activity in the state. But yes, labor unions they don't want us to exist in my state. I mean, I think
Any
that's
state.
pretty clear.
And same, and I would say that in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Teachers Association is incredibly has a ton of money, and they pour a lot of it into ensuring that charter schools cannot replicate, cannot be newly established, and they will. I'm all for unionization if that's what teachers in a charter school want, but the union will come in and explicitly say we're going to unionize this charter school to close you,
Mm.
right? And they're very explicit about it. They're not hiding the ball. So, but yes, to answer.
Well, I commend you for the work that you've done in your states, because coming from Connecticut, I know it's not easy when you have to fight the unions to do what's right. And so, again, I commend you for the innovation and work, especially healthcare. That's a good one. So I would love for you to come to Connecticut. We're right next door.
I mean, seriously. Okay, we have a 50 state charter school model right here sitting on this. Okay. Thank you everybody for being here. So here's the last takeaway for you. I know everyone needs to scramble to get out of here to go to the airport. We need policymakers to be thinking about how you can keep the policy and regulatory climate strong to support charter school growth and autonomy and flexibility to serve the kids in your state. And we appreciate everything you do. We know that those of you who serve on education committees have an extraordinarily hard job. You come into your committee hearings and you get yelled at by everybody. We know that. It is hard, and you are doing really, really important work for little kids who depend on you. So thank you. Thanks for being here and have a safe trip home.
Don't go home yet. We've got Tim Urban coming up at lunch.
Right. Don't go home yet. Thank you.